Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. We have a wonderful guest, Dr. Michael Pillsbury. How are you, sir?
Hi, thank you.
It's a pleasure. Now, you wrote an amazing book, The 100-Year Marathon, that grabbed my attention because of its incredible relevance, China's secret strategy to replace America as the global superpower. This book has taken off in Asia. The Chinese have the book, although they keep it under glass. You're a senior fellow, director of Chinese strategy at the Hudson Institute, a distinguished defense policy advisor, former high-ranking governmental official. You've written many books and reports on China. You're educated at Stanford, BA in history with honors in social thought, Columbia University, MA, PhD. During the Reagan administration, you were the Assistant Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Planning and responsible for implementation, the program of covert aid known as the Reagan Doctrine. But you worked for Nixon, George H.W. Bush, Reagan, somewhat Obama. Anyone else that I missed? That covers. That
yes.
pretty much covers it. So you've spent your entire career, your professional career, really, focused on China. And I want to read you just a couple sentences out of your book to elaborate on this for me. China's marathon strategy depends heavily on goodwill from other countries, especially the United States. That goodwill translates into massive foreign investment, the acceptance of Chinese exports, indulgences when the government or state-affiliated organizations are caught stealing technology or violating WTO rules and looking the other way on human rights abuses. Western countries offer such concessions primarily because their leaders are convinced that overall China is moving in the right direction toward freer markets, productive international cooperation, and political liberalization. What do you mean by all that?
Well, China enjoys enormous goodwill inside our government, inside a number of governments around the world. They've worked very hard to earn that goodwill because, frankly, it pays off for them. If they had not had our market for their exports over the last 40 years, and if they had not had our direct investment and our scientific exchange programs, the help of our companies, they wouldn't be the great power they are today. They're number 2 in the world. By some statistics, they're already number 1 in overall size of their economy. So they've done this quite consciously, that they got advice from Nobel Prize-winning economists from the World Bank 40 years ago. How do we do this? How do we become number 1 in the world? And they realized it was not through hostility or demonizing other countries. It was going to be by getting inside the governments of these other countries to extract what you might call the way to become the number 1 power in the world. And they've succeeded in doing that. Now there's a pushback against it recently, but I would say their strategy has worked brilliantly over the last 40 years.
They've gotten inside our government. They've gotten inside our businesses. They've gotten our technology. How did this happen?
Well, Americans have dreams about our own system inspiring other countries, city on the hill, things like that. And the Chinese played to that. They were actually quite an extreme communist-dominated nation. But in their ancient thinking, they know that to get the resources a country needs to pander, if you will, to the values and the wishful thinking of other countries. They did this a lot 2,500 years ago in what they call the Warring States period. So they held out the notion to American leaders successfully. If you help us, someday we're going to be just like you. And it worked. I remember Deng Xiaoping visiting here, a sole visit to America in 1979. He wore a huge white cowboy hat and went to a rodeo as though he was a fellow Texan. I joked with Senator Ted Cruz about this, that he was pandering right to the instincts of Texans. This is a good old boy, comes to a rodeo and wears a white hat. Take that times 100. I hate to use the word insinuate, but they've got into our companies in pretty much the same way. That we have a market of 600 million in the world in the bourgeois middle class. You can market your products to that class, but you're going to have, some sharing attitudes toward your technology.
In other words, we are towards them.
Yes. And it worked.
Let's jump into that.
It's a kind of wishful thinking that was played to.
So we're naive.
I would prefer to say optimistic.
Optimistic.
Inspired by the founding fathers that surely China wants democracy and a free market. Now, 40 years later, we know that's not true. The crackdown, they have even less democracy than they had in the 80s. The free market, they clearly have stopped at about a 50% total of their economy. And they want the commanding heights, as socialists would say, to be under the control of the Communist Party. So our wishful thinking was wrong. But now it's pretty hard to undo all that. You have a whole generation trained in Washington, D.C. to think of China as at least a friend and partner, if not an ally. And you throw into that what the book is really about, is our secret cooperation with China through CIA and the Pentagon, a lot of things we did together during the Cold War that in many ways taught our intelligence community and our military not to see China as an enemy. And they've exploited that wishful thinking as well. Even as they do things that only an enemy would do, they keep denying it, and we keep believing them. This is, I think, the dilemma President Trump faces today.
Let's break this down. Technology, whether it's economic or military, or they overlap. How are they pilfering our technology?
Well, they began with a statement 40 years ago that the key source of economic growth is science and technology. So they zeroed in on science and technology as the single most important national security goal they could have. Once you do that, and you ask your own Chinese scientists, tell me the future, the scientists can come back and say there's something called nanotechnology manufacturing that no one ever heard of at the time, or artificial intelligence, or any one of a range of almost 100 high-tech processes. Then the next step is, well, which companies in America have those processes? And then they would go through the front door and try to get some of it. What they couldn't get through the front door, they would steal through the back door. And frankly, one of the first things they did is to wake up Jimmy Carter at 3 o'clock in the morning. His science advisor was in Beijing, and the Chinese made clear we want an agreement that all of our students who want to go to America in science can go, and the National Science Foundation will share all American scientific discoveries quickly with China. Mr. Frank Press was his name. He was so moved by this that he called Jimmy Carter from Beijing. Can I agree to this? Carter said yes, and that became the foundation for our own government sharing a great deal of science and technology with China. So it's the scale of what they've tried to do that's important. It's not just nickel and dime, grab one little patent here. It's a comprehensive approach that to become number one in the world, we've got to get hold of what they call the innovation technology base. Find out the most dramatic, profit-making technologies in the world and get them by one means or another. And as I say, we mostly helped them. Our government did, through the front door, and our companies did as well, under the illusion that someday the Chinese market would open up and these companies would enjoy massive profits. Only a few companies have succeeded at that. Most have not.
What happens to these companies that go to China, like Apple and so forth? They're forced to give up significant proprietary information, are they not, in order to do business in that market?
Yes, there's a variety of techniques. Sometimes they will insist on a joint venture where the Chinese partner can demand technology transfer take place. Sometimes they focus on an individual in a company who has the trade secrets of the company, and they will in some sense recruit him, not necessarily as an espionage asset, but as somebody who they simply offer a salary of $2 million. That you leave, in this case I'm thinking of it was General Motors, you leave your company and come to work for us and show us how to make cars. And so they're now the number one seller of automobiles in the world. Of course, they didn't tell General Motors and Jeep or Volkswagen at the time. They had a kind of stealthy approach to all this. And if asked, are you trying to get hold of the world's best technology? to become the world's #1 power, they would laugh and say, of course not. China has no such ambitions. What a silly thing.
Do they think we're dupes?
I think they praise their own strategy, that they, as they say, they has ancient roots.
Are we dupes?
I think our presidents, and including myself at the time as an advisor to these presidents, we did not understand the scale of China's ambitions. So any particular example that would be detected, the FBI would just arrest the person committing economic espionage, maybe put them in jail for 6 months or a year, and assume this was a one-off thing. So the scale was just not in our philosophy. I hate to say we were dupes. We didn't understand the consequences of building up another power to surpass us. I don't think even President Reagan thought that China would amount to what it has turned into today.
Are we dupes now?
Well, a lot of people want to call an end to all this, want better terms of trade. There's still a community that says China will collapse, don't worry about it. There's still a community that says they just want to be our partner in the world. But as they ignore United Nations resolutions, as they're caught with more and more technology theft, it becomes harder to explain this away. So I think we're in a period now, which I think will go on for many more years, of waking up, but being a little bit uncertain what to do when China and China's friends are already deep inside our system. We never faced this with the Soviets in the Cold War. They were always over there, and there weren't huge Soviet companies and Soviet investments inside America. And it was considered treason to help the Soviet Union. But with China, it's the opposite. They're considered our friends, and it's considered a little bit too conservative to be against China these days.
How's Donald Trump doing with respect to China? He seems to be changing the paradigm a bit, doesn't he?
Yes, he's got their attention. They're in a very feisty kind of fighting mode where they're matching all of his tariffs with their own threats. They're saying that they're innocent. All these allegations he's made and his team has made in various reports of technology theft, forcible technology transfer, and many others. They claim they're innocent. This evidence doesn't hold up. And in something that's really quite dramatic, they have said that China is now leading the rest of the world in favor of free trade against President Trump. Even I, who have great admiration for Chinese strategy, as you can tell, even I didn't think they would be that dramatic to say, we are protecting the world against President Trump in terms of free trade. And this has a lot of people who believe it.
But he's actually hurting them somewhat.
Yes.
I mean, the value of their currency has dropped 25, 30%. Our currency value has gone up 17%. Even if you're a free trader like I am.
Yes.
That has nothing to do with China. For me, it's a national security issue. You agree it's a national security issue?
I do.
Yeah.
That's why I wrote the book, frankly. I'm trying to sound the alarm that it's not too late, although I think it may be too late. But the scale of what we're going to have to do to turn things around is enormous. We're going to have
I want to pursue this after the break. And can we, given what our Congress focuses on, they're focused on Russia, what our media focus on and so forth. China has a single focus because it's an autocracy. We have 1,000 different focuses, and China might be among them and maybe not. And do they use that to our advantage? Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, most weeknights you can watch Levin TV on crtv.com, crtv.com. We'd love to have you join our community over there. Call 844-LEVIN-TV, 844-LEVIN-TV. It's that simple. Give us a call.